Thank you, Jean. Listening to all of that, one would think I don't work. I just participate in volunteer organizations. And in fact, when my children were young, they threatened to enroll me in Volunteers Anonymous because they claimed that I volunteered before the question was even asked to volunteer. But nothing could be further from the truth. But I am very committed to community service, and I hope that some of my comments today will help inspire you or solidify what you're already doing in your own personal lives. As I was thinking about the topic of powering up and your relationship to the college, as well as your relationship with your counselors, your faculty members, your teachers, and our staff at the college, I was hoping I could bring some comments to you that would benefit not only you, but also our staff and faculty, because they're also asking themselves the question still, who is she? And I've only been here 4 months, and so I see it on the faces of our staff. They're still trying to wrap their arms around who this new president is. And so I hope my comments appeal both to your interests as well as the interest of our staff. So what I came up with is a title that I wanted to put to the conversation, and that is entitling my talk to you, Teachers and Students as Servant Leaders. Let me explain how I came up with the theme of servant leadership within the context of the Women's Speaker Series. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was an elementary school teacher, and during the war in Germany, he was transferred to the village where I grew up to be the principal of the school there. And although I never had a chance to know him personally, I grew up hearing stories about him and how much he had impacted the students there and the community at large. In fact, one of my elementary school teachers used to credit my grandfather for guiding him into education. What was always gratifying to hear was how much he went above and beyond his job description to assist students and their families, how much they had admired and respected him, and how he was seen as a leader who set an example for selfless service. And while I cannot say with certainty that his legacy prompted me to go into education, I do at least think that it had some effect on me to have me pursue a career in education. In hearing about some of the stories of our students served by our Women's Center, and the stories of our students in particular, I find that there are similarities to the stories I had heard about my grandfather. Those similarities are that the teacher who seems to have the most impact on the students are those who work tirelessly and oftentimes without any public recognition, and they are seen by the students as leaders, men and women they respect and look up to. As for the students, virtually every one of you, I am sure, gives tremendously of your time, your talent, and your skills to provide volunteer and community service in addition to excelling in your schoolwork. And to the dedication, and you're dedicated to your families, and in all of those endeavors, you are leaders as well. So the topic for this talk came naturally as a result of how I think of my grandfather and what I see in the description of the TCC students at TCC and those who are served by our women's centers. As an educator myself, and someone who also volunteers her time for many causes and activities, what your service as teachers to your students and your service as students to each other and to your families and your communities exemplifies is what has been described as servant leadership. This idea of servant leadership was made popular by Robert Greenleaf, an executive for AT&T for 20 years, in his book, Servant Leader. Anybody in here who has read that book? If you're not familiar? Okay, well then let it be an introduction to him and his philosophy. He differentiates servant leaders from others of goodwill because they act on what they believe in with their heart. Servant leaders, in his words, know experientially, and there is a sustaining spirit when they venture forth. The concept may seem unique, but it is really not such a new idea. In the words of the gospel writer Luke, a leader is described as one who serves. In modern times, the writer Hermann Hesse, in his story Journey to the East, tells the story of Leo, a servant doing menial chores for a group of men on a mythical journey. In subtle ways, Leo is the glue that holds the group together and makes the group meaningful. However, when he leaves, the group disbands and the journey is ended. Years later, one of the group's members finds that Leo is really the great and noble leader of a religious order. But it was never apparent to the travelers when Leo was doing menial chores for them. Leo was the leader the whole time, and nobody knew, but he was servant first. When we understand the concept of servant leadership, we will unlock a rich, secret source of energy, of legitimate power, and of the kind of toughness that is necessary to be an effective leader. How, might you ask, does one differentiate that truly giving servant from the person whose net influence is either neutral or who takes away from or diminishes other people? Robert Greenleaf tells the story of a rabbi who had just completed a lecture on true and untrue prophets, and he is asked if there was a way to differentiate between the two, and he answers, "There is no way. If there were a way, if one had a gauge to slip over the head of the prophet and establish without question that he is or is not a true prophet, there would be no human dilemma and life would have no meaning." So it is with servant leaders. If there were a dependable way that would tell us some people enrich by their presence, they are neutral, or others they take away or diminish, life might be on the surface much simpler, but it would certainly also be without challenge. Yet it is very important that we know, both about ourselves and about others, whether the net effect of one's influence on others enriches, is neutral, or diminishes and depletes. Let me spend a little time describing leadership exhibited by some well-known leaders, and then I will describe 4 leadership traits that are generally accepted as being important for leadership in general, but more so that they are critical components in the servant leadership paradigm and exemplified by the 3 leaders that I will mention briefly. Leadership is a very big word, and it is very difficult to get your arms around it. Other than the word love, it is probably the most widely used word today. Leadership comes in many forms, and it can be seen in many people, rich and poor, young and old, large and small. In a recent article, I saw a quote, and it says, "As the ant once told the elephant, it's not always size that indicates real strength." Sometimes the greatest leaders are the most unimposing figures, coming from the humblest of backgrounds. One of such great leaders was Mahatma Gandhi. What he lacked in size, he more than made up in his gigantic leadership, in charisma, speaking skills, and an unflagging desire to help his people and his country through a period of civil change. 2 other such leaders were, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King and more recently Nelson Mandela. Leadership is also an art or a craft, something to be learned over time, but not simply by reading books. Leadership is more tribal than scientific, more of a weaving of relationships than an acquisition of information, and that is why it is so difficult to come up with a single clear definition. More often than not, the best way to discuss true leadership is by describing what it is not. It is also much easier to describe certain traits or skills that leaders exhibit. So let me describe 4 skills or traits that I think one must have no matter what leadership role one is playing, whether as a teacher in a classroom, as the president of a college, or of a major Fortune 500 company, as a leader of students, or as a leader in a community group or your church. The first of these competencies is the ability to create a vision. The ability to create a vision. It is apparent in all leaders, but what is vision? It is a compelling idea, an inspiration, one that you draw people toward. It is a whole lot more than making an organization work well. It's more than just having all the right people hired in the right places, the books balanced, and all the machinery working well. or the floors nice and clean and the buildings in decent shape, or the most modern buildings. But if they're without the sense of a direction of where the organization is heading, that organization is like a ship, albeit in tip-top shape, but it does not have a captain that leads. Like a ship, organizations must have a leader who can provide the vision for the right direction. One discovers that the most effective leaders must also have the ability to articulate that vision. The ability to articulate that vision. And I don't mean talking to you the way I am talking to you right now. The real leader must be able to provide meaning to the vision so that people buy into it. I may have all kinds of ideas about what we ought to be doing, for example, in education, and how archaic some of our practices are. In fact, if I had my druthers, I would love to change many of them or all of them, go in another direction and upset the apple cart, so to speak. Perhaps then we could see the differences in our youth as well as in our adult learners. But unless I can make everyone understand the meaning of it and have legislators and everyone else buy into it, our faculty, our staff, and in fact our students, then all I am is a talker and a dreamer, and I think we sure know many examples of people who are talkers and dreamers who cannot articulate meaning. It takes a blend of having a vision and being able to articulate that vision to make something happen and to pull or sometimes push people toward that vision in order to yield visible and positive results. A leader initiates, provides the ideas and the structure, and takes, along with those who follow him, the risk of failure along with the chance for success. As Robert Greenleaf describes the leader, I will go, follow me, while knowing that the path may be uncertain and even dangerous. Being able to articulate a vision is really important, but even if you have a vision and you can articulate it, no one is going to follow you unless they can trust you. And so the ability to inculcate trust is the third component of leadership, the ability to inculcate trust. And it is also as crucial. The main determination of trust in my mind is reliability and confidence in a leader's values. We trust people who are not constantly hip-hopping on both sides of the fence. And while we may not agree with them, and they may be on the other side of the fence, but when we can rely on them and their values, we can trust them, and we're more likely to follow them. The fourth competency is a more difficult one to develop among the other three, but nevertheless it is just as important, and that is knowledge of self. You are probably thinking, what does she mean? That's not so difficult, I know myself. Each of us knows that we have weaknesses. Even the greatest of leaders are known to us have flaws. But we do really need to understand why is it that we sometimes wonder when we go into a meeting, make a presentation or say something, and the reaction is as if one had thrown a bucket of water on everybody. What is it that turns people off? We have good ideas. We even did our homework and prepared all the facts, and still we have turned everybody off and no one is listening to us, let alone follow us. It is really important to be able to reflect, to go inside yourself, to find out about yourself as a person, and ask yourself tough questions. Are you too egotistical? Are you too arrogant? Do you push too hard for your ideas? Do you steamroll people? Do you not tolerate ambiguity? Do you communicate clearly, or are you condescending towards others because you think you know everything and they don't? Over the years, I've had the privilege of having met men and women who are true leaders, and I am humbled by being in their presence. They all have exhibited those competencies which I have described above: vision, the ability to articulate that vision, the ability to inculcate trust, and to know oneself. That is what differentiates them from the flashy talkers and the dreamers. Leaders care about people. They are leaders not because of power, position, or authority, but because they want to make a difference. They want to make life better for someone else. Max de Pree wrote in his book, Leadership is an Art, that the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. And get this, in between the two, in between defining reality and between saying thank you, the leader must become a servant and a debtor. Somehow the words servant and debtor confuse us, spoken within the context of leadership. On the one hand, leaders are supposed to be dynamic, they are supposed to be powerful, and then someone like Robert Greenleaf comes along and says that leaders should also be servants. There are numerous comparisons between the mere manager and the leader. The former does only what is expected, or even less, takes few risks, makes little effort to serve, train, empower, nurture, or lead others, and in the end makes little contribution to the success of the organization, to their students, to their community at large. Conversely, the budding or developing leader is defined as a careful risk taker, a diligent and tireless worker, a rule breaker when necessary, a naysayer when necessary, a skilled and charismatic communicator, and perhaps most importantly, is never satisfied with the status quo. Warren Bennis says, and I paraphrase, mere managers may do things right, but real leaders do the right things. I am convinced that you, our students, are such leaders. You give tirelessly of yourself in student clubs. You give service to your families, your church, and the community. You may be volunteering at a community center, homeless shelters, after school to tutor students, or during school hours tutoring your fellow college students. And you lead Scout and other youth groups. You do the right things. We are all leaders or followers at different times. Picture in your mind for a moment an orchestra. If the flute is the soloist, then the entire orchestra is playing in the background, softly giving the flute the opportunity to lead, and it enriches. But then the flute sits down, and it may be the violin that is the solo with the flute playing in the background. We all have our opportunities, depending on the situation, to lead or to follow and support. A good leader must know when to be a good follower and also when to be a good servant. To be a servant leader, Greenleaf suggests that a person is servant first, then consciously makes the choice to or aspires to lead. That person is sharply different from the person who decides to be a leader and not a servant first. Perhaps it's because of need. The person who wants to be a leader first has a need for power, or they want to acquire more money for material possessions. They are the ones who say, I'm going to be at the top of Wall Street, I'm going to be a CEO of this business, of this organization, or I'm going to be the president of this college, so I can make big bucks and I can get that Jaguar, or whatever material thing you like. This differs from the person who listens to the needs of the people and makes sure that other people's highest priorities are being served. That's the different kind of leader. Another way of differentiating the two is this way. One says, I am leader, your job is to follow me. The other says, where would you like to go? I'll aid you in getting there. Again, I see all our teachers, our counselors in this role. Our great teachers are those who have no need for power. They listen to the needs of their students. Their desire is to help their students reach their potential and to succeed in school and in life. They, like the servant leader, establish relationships with our students based on empathy and collaboration. One of the reasons people like Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King, or Nelson Mandela stand out in our minds as leaders is the fact that they had walked in the shoes of their followers. They had experienced the same pain and suffering, and they had come from the same humble backgrounds as those whom they were leading. If there ever was a man who fit the definition of humility, it is Mahatma Gandhi. From his early experiences in South Africa to his work for India's revolution of independence from Britain, to his later years as the nation's political and spiritual leader, he always exhibited a sense of quiet grace, subtle strength, and power. You may probably wonder if I am trying to imply that true leaders can only be those who have experienced pain and suffering. Of course not. But true leaders should not be ostentatious. They should possess at least a sense of modicum or a sense of humility. Few of us will ever have the type of experiences that those three leaders had, but we as servants in our society must make an honest attempt to understand the needs of other human beings in order to truly understand how we can bring our own strength and resources to positively impact those who are either less fortunate than we or whose needs we are serving. There are many issues inherent in this collaborative approach. Ask any teacher here, any counselor, or any parent to collaborate in a professional sense, to collaborate as a leader, is tough. It takes perseverance. It takes strength and toughness to be a servant leader. Gandhi said this about the benefit of servant leadership, and I quote, "It's the action, not the fruit of the action. That's important. You have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power, and it may not be in your time, that there will be any fruit, but that doesn't mean that you stop doing the right thing. You may never know what results come from your action, but if you do nothing, there'll be no results." Servant leadership liberates and enables other people. From what I know about you as students, working and being served in our women's centers, you are very action-oriented, and servant leadership is very action-oriented. If you care about what other people want and how they want to achieve it, and if you care about moving forward toward a vision, then you have to act. Everything you do is a celebration of people, and the servant leader is one who cares about people, who celebrates people and celebrates their potential. And you as teachers celebrate every time one of your students is successful. They celebrate the students when they receive a good grade, especially in a subject area that they've been struggling with. And you as students celebrate every time you see someone you tutor overcome an obstacle, or you celebrate with that senior citizen in a nursing home for whom your mere presence brings a smile to their face. I would argue that becoming a servant leader makes every day of your life a celebration. And so my call to you, and therefore my call to you, is to power up by celebrating every day of your life in servant leadership to yourself, your family, and your community. And thank you for giving me your attention.